Okay, so let's go to the book. Now, the book talks about objects. It says, what is an object? And think of an object, the class. I created the dog class in the previous example. That dog class, think of it as kind of a blueprint. We've drawn a blueprint, and that's really all that class is. The class itself doesn't hold any data. We can't use it directly, so really all it is a blueprint. So what we do is we create a variable, which the variable then becomes the object itself. And it has all of those things that were created in the blueprint. In the previous one we created a field called name and a field called sound, another one called action, and then we basically set each one of those fields to something, and then when we need to get the data back, we can then get it back. Okay, so again, think of the class that we create as a blueprint, and then the variable that we create from that is the actual object, because that's the thing that holds the data. It's the stuff we put in, the stuff we get out. So let's take a look at the very first item that is in the books on page 325. It's the object demo. So if we look at it, here we have a class object demo, and we basically have a void main, so it's executable. We've got my scanner keyboard, we've got a random ran. So if we look here we have a class called random. We're creating a variable called rand, and we're instantiating it as a new random. So once that line executes, we now have an object called rand, and it contains all of the fields and methods that are available that have been written for that random class. So we come down here and we basically then we say number is equal to that rand object that we created dot next int. So there's a method called nextInt. Now, how many methods are available to us? Well, again, I can do a shift space, and there it is. Now again, a lot of the objects, a lot of the classes have default methods. So Java. The Java API basically provides a lot of different classes for us automatically. Some of these have been written. Okay, so so that is a class. Okay, so again, the rand now is the class, or I should say the object that was created from the random class, and again, all the APIs that are basically available to us. Okay, it talks about on page 327, talks about primitive variables versus objects, and primitives are your byte, short, int, long, char, float, double, so on and so forth. So, but an object, so those hold those. Think of those as Tupperware containers. The Tupperware container says only this type of data can go in here. So a double can only hold double data. Okay, we're talking, and again, we do have it's got the largest variable it can be to the smallest variable it could be, an integer and a short, okay, and a long. They can't contain decimal places, so they're basically whole numbers. So all those different types of things. Now, objects can hold a whole lot of stuff. They can hold ints, they can hold strings, they can hold doubles, and they can hold all different types of data inside of them. So on page 328, it talks about the memory allocated. The memory that is allocated for a primitive variable is the actual location. So again, when we talk about a primitive and we talk about that address, it's talking about where it's actually located in memory, not relative or something else like that. Where an object is more or less, hey, it kind of gets kind of hung up between the class and the object of where things are stored. It says the object that is created in memory holds the data of some sort and performs operations of that same sort. So it does kind of point to where it's located, but there's a whole lot of different stuff inside of there. Again, we could have a string, we could have a primitive variable, and so now we basically where's the string? Again, we're talking about the address, not the physical location. So again, kind of going back what we talked about in the previous class, CIS113, talking about basically primitives versus relatives. So, okay. So on page 330, kind of talks a simple class step by step, and I kind of demonstrated that with the dog class, how I created a class that allows me to then instantiate a class as an object. Okay, and we talk about those things. Now, if you look on page 331, let me see if I can get there myself. It's just really kind of nice because it allows us to start using some new tools that we all have to kind of sort of get used to, because it's kind of the uniform way to kind of discuss things. And it's called UML. And UML stands for Unified Modeling Language. And think of it as kind of a way to draw out your code. And so basically what we're going to do is we're going to draw a box. Okay? And we're going to have it separated into sections. Now we might not use all the sections, we might just use one or two or three, but for the most part I think what we're going to be utilizing is three sections. So the very first section is going to be the name of the object itself, and then the fields that are available to that object are going to be in the second section, and then the methods are listed below. Now if we look, here is the rectangle class. Now it's called rectangle, and we've got length and width. Those are the two fields that are going to be available. We've got set length, set width, get length, get width, and then we've got get area. So we know about these getters and setters, but there's a new one called get area. We don't have an area up here, but it's a method, and we're going to cover that here in just a sec. So now what someone could do is actually draw this box, and then as a developer, as a programmer, we could take that box and go ahead and create the code from it. Now the one thing we don't know is what's going to be in set length. We don't know the rules there yet. A business partner or somebody who is maybe one level above us will then give us the directions of what needs to be in that method. But we can actually kind of write the skeleton code of that. So the very first thing we do is we say public class rectangle. Now public says this is available to anybody who basically wants to utilize this class. And then so again, the access specifier, is it public, is it private, is it protected? Okay, and then the class name itself, and then any members that go inside there. So writing the code for the class field, so we say class rectangle, and then we get private double length. Now the reason we make things private is we need to control how that field is set and how that field is accessed. So the set is a method that takes that field and sets it to some data, whatever the case may be. And then we basically then control how they can get it as well. Now, one thing we could do is we could actually make a field read-only. That means we set it within the program, but we do not have a setter. We only have a getter that only allows that field to be read. Nobody can write to it. So that's kind of nice. So we can control that. If we made this a public item, then anybody could just access that field directly. They wouldn't have to go through a getter or a setter. So again, the great thing about getters and setters, it allows us to have full control over how the users access that particular field. So if they want to use my class and create an object from it, they're going to have to abide by my rules. And my rules are, I keep it private. Okay. Talks about private and public, and then the set length. So there's the setter. And so here's the actual code. So let's take a look at the code, and I think I set it up as rectangle 1. So here it is. So here is my rectangle class. Um, Public class rectangle 1, I call it rectangle 1, and then I've got my private double length, private double width. So I've got two fields, they're doubles, they're private. That means nobody can see them. If you want to access them, you have to use this set length. Now if we look, this is a write only. We do not have a read. They can only write to the length field. That's all they can do. They can't do anything else. So again, we have full control of our class to allow folks what we want them to do with that particular item. Okay, now width. Now if we take a look at width, it's kind of useless because outside of this class, nobody has access to the width. They can't do anything with width. Width is unreadable and it's unwritable. And since it's private, only this rectangle class can see it. Guess what? It's kind of useless at this point. So the example they're trying to use there is, hey, it's not being used. Now if you notice, we've got our little warning symbols over here. If you point to them, it will say, hey, this thing's not being used anywhere, and neither is this one. So all we're doing is writing to it. Okay, so again, we have control. We have the power to allow folks to have access to that, read access, write access, or both, one or the other. So now I'm going to open up the length demo on page 334. And this is a public main. So notice I've got rectangle 1 box. So rectangle 1 is my class that I'm going to create an object from. So again, my rectangle 1 is my blueprint. I'm creating an object called box from it. And I'm instantiating it as a new rectangle, and I've got my left and right parentheses. I've got nothing in the parentheses. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I just say sysprint line, sending the value 10.0 to the length method. So box.setLength is 10. So I'm passing in. So if I go back to my rectangle, here I'm expecting a double N. I'm calling it length. And I'm saying length, which is my length up here, is equal to len. So when I get done with this statement right here, I've created a box object and the length has been set to 10.0. So now I've got an object sitting there with the length. Okay, and then I can say print done. Okay, so this really is not going to do anything. So if I run this length demo, it pretty much says send the value 10.0 to the set length method and done. That's it. You know, we really need to see inside of that object to see what it basically is holding right now. So as you can see, we've got an object. We've set the method, or we've used the method set to set a field to something. The other field not used. It's kind of worthless at that point. So now let's take a look at the next one, which happens to be the rectangle. I call it rectangle 2. They're all called rectangle, but I renamed them 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So take a look. Whoop, I already got that one. So rectangle 2. We look at that guy, and there we have private double length, private double width, same exact as the other one. Except now I've got a set length and I've got a set width. So now I can set each of those fields. Okay, so basically what I have is a write, but I don't have a read yet. Okay, so there's my set and my set. I'm passing in a double, I'm passing in a double. Void means I'm returning nothing. So all it's doing is doing something with that field. Okay, so setters, we're going to talk about getters in the next video lecture, so we'll see you in a bit.